Hi, Nigel here from lawfulrebel.com. In this video, we are going to address the question, what is truth? And we're going to answer that question and dispel some of the myths and some of the nonsense that goes along with answers to that question, what is truth? So truth, first and foremost, is the most important concept and the most valuable commodity with which you will ever deal as a human being. Being able to discern the truth is a matter of life and death, absolutely, literally, from what foods nourish versus what foods poison you or shorten your life, to should you or should you not participate in some experimental new medical treatment or not. You need to know the truth in order to live and to survive in a very literal sense. Sadly, the truth is a very rare commodity these days, as you are no doubt aware. It's very much discounted in our current culture. It's been said that we live in the post-truth era, to our bitter cost, I would add. We are absolutely inundated with falseness in the mainstream narrative, from things like bogus climate emergencies, false flag terrorism, cholesterol causes heart disease, fluoride in the water supply is allegedly good for everybody's teeth. You could go on and on. But we need to know the truth in every issue that we deal with in order to live as functional human beings. To have any kind of successful life, in order to thrive, you need to constantly be discerning correctly what information is true and what information is false. Truth is a simple concept in truth. Truth really is a simple concept, but it has been dressed up to look complicated and difficult to grasp, and can we really know anything? This is really fashionable amongst modern philosophers, is that you can't really know anything, which is obvious nonsense. And the concept of truth has been messed with, shall we say. So as we examine the answers in the mainstream to this question, what is truth? If you just Google what is truth and look through a few videos or a few philosophical website pages, you'll quickly find yourself in a quagmire. You'll quickly find yourself bogged down in heavy-going stuff that you just can't get your head around. And I think it's important to know, guys, that truth is the first casualty of war. And in an age of propaganda and deception, in the post-truth era, it would be very naive of us to think that the concept of truth hadn't been messed with, redefined, waters muddied around it, in order to further confuse and prevent people from finding the truth. If you don't even know what this thing is that you're looking for, you're not exactly starting off on the right foot. In just the same way that the political class has been hijacked, that governments have been hijacked by nefarious forces, parasite forces who would seek to control humanity, so has the intellectual class. In fact, the intellectual class and the philosophers were hijacked way before, because that all must come first. A civilization, a culture, will necessarily go in the direction set by its thinking, by its philosophers, just as any man, woman, or any individual has to process ideas, and they have to really sink in before we act on them. So the philosophers, those that define truth, the intellectual class, were the first to be heftily influenced by those who are seeking to influence our behaviour away from our self-interest, those who are seeking to control us. So this is a very important point to get. If you're a truth seeker and you want to know what truth is, you must bear this in mind as part of the context of this particular inquiry when you seek to understand what exactly is the nature of truth. So what's the whole point of truth? What's it for? Well, ultimately, we seek to discern truth, to know truth, in order to know how to act, in order to know what to do, in order to really to know how to live. And this insight really helps to inform us as to the nature of the concept of truth. It's reality that we need to know in order to live, because our lives happen in reality. This is where we live. So this is what we need to know about. We need to know the facts of reality, from everything, from where's the bathroom to how do you make fire to how do we make computers. Everything we need to know to live depends on us finding out about reality. Truth is a conceptual idea. This is important to note as we approach a definition. So it only has meaning for beings who can conceptualize, i.e. humans. It's not something that it's not a concern of any other living organisms other than we humans with our rational faculty. And it also means, of course, that truth has no actual existence as such. It exists as an idea or as a label on an idea in our human minds. So we can edge towards a definition here. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. Truth is the conceptual recognition of reality expressed in language. Now, this is important to know, that as we discuss truth and we think about what is true and we use these concepts in our language, it's important to know that the thing we are trying to recognize and uncover knowledge about, this thing called reality, the world around us, it's important to recognize that language, by its very nature, has limitations. It is not a precise tool for expressing ideas, not remotely a precise tool. Most of us have considerable difficulty choosing words simply to express emotions and feelings that we are directly in touch with and to explain them to other people. So language is a challenge to use. And, you can see increasingly these days, young people seem to be less and less able to express themselves clearly. But the point here is that language has very serious limitations, and we must bear that in mind as we try to use it to discover reality, to try and discern what's real from what is not, in terms of claims, propositions, and what people are saying, agendas, ideas, etc. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. Is it true that fat makes you fat? Well, how to answer that? What's the reality? Not what's the story that you've heard all your life. What do they say in the mainstream media? Because they'll, of course, still say that fat makes you fat. But if you consult the facts of reality, you'll discover that fat doesn't make you fat. It's slightly counterintuitive, but it's true. And the simplest way to do that is to experiment for yourself. If you removed all processed carbs from your diet for a few weeks and you gorge out on butter and eggs and all healthy fats, you would find that you don't put on weight. I indulge in such a diet and I do not get fat from eating fat. So it's something that's easily testable, is the point. You can test reality and discover it. So reality is where we have to look, and the truth is that which corresponds with reality. So from that, if truth is that which corresponds with reality, we know that reality is an objective absolute. So it follows that truth is not a subjective concept. It doesn't depend on how I feel about something, whether or not it's true. It doesn't depend, the truth of a proposition doesn't depend what we feel about it or what we think about it. It can't do. If we were sitting around and trying to figure out which were the poisonous mushrooms or whether they were safe or not, our beliefs about that issue would clearly have no bearing on the capacity of the mushrooms to poison us. If we wanted water to flow uphill for our own convenience, it wouldn't make any difference if we got tens of thousands of people to all meditate and concentrate and believe that water would flow uphill. It wouldn't, because the facts of reality are objective. So truth is not subjective. Phrases like, it may be true for you, but it's not true for me, this is nonsense. And there's often a confusion between things that we necessarily experience subjectively, our own feelings in terms of hot and cold, hunger or satiety, or emotions such as feeling angry or sad or happy. These are obviously things that we experience, and we know it's true if we're feeling happy. But generally what we're talking about here in the context of knowing what's true is what's true out there in the real world. What's true out there in the narrative. This is the really practical, day-to-day functional stuff. But it's still important to remember that truth is not subjective, it's objective, and in the general sense, outside of thought, feelings and emotions, as I say. And another important point to note is that it's not about perspective. Some people like to use these clever little experiments to sort of try and mess with the concept of truth, saying that everybody's truth is true, which is nonsense. Experiments such as a ball that's one colour on one side and another colour on the other side, and two people looking at it from opposite directions, clearly their different perspectives see the ball as a different colour. And this is supposed to illustrate that everybody's truth is true and therefore nobody's, because the point here is that you need full context to discern truth. And a human being has the capacity to look around any particular object and clock it, to examine every aspect of a thing or an idea, every perspective on a claim, an idea, or a thing. This is the intellectual work of the truth seeker. We don't just glance at something from one point and say, yeah, that's what I see, I'm happy with that. That's not how to be a truth seeker. So all-round perspective, full context is absolutely essential if you want to find the truth. So there are several different theories of truth that are popular. I've already announced that truth is the recognition of reality, and the first theory we're going to look at is basically is that one. It's called the correspondence theory of truth, and this is probably by far the most common understanding of truth, thank goodness, because it appeals to common sense, common rationality, and it's also, you know, the closest to saying what truth is, you know, as in truth corresponding to reality. So let's just look at this. It argues that an idea is held to be true because it corresponds to facts about the world. For example, the fact that water always flows downhill, or the claim that water always flows downhill, is true because in reality, of course, water does in fact always flow downhill. So this idea of correspondence theory was probably initially presented by Aristotle some 2,500 years ago or so, and he came up with this cunning little sort of tongue twister that summarizes it quite well. It goes like this: to say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false, while to say of what is that it is, and of what is not that it is not, is true. So this is the earliest recognition of the correspondence theory of truth, but it was quickly attacked. And there's a chap called Eubulides, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, a philosophy student back there in ancient Greece, who claimed that the correspondence theory of truth leaves us in the lurch when we are confronted with the so-called liar's paradox, with statements such as "I am lying" or "what I'm saying here is false." As statements, this argument goes on to say, they are capable of being true or false. However, if they are true because they correspond with reality, i.e. if it's true that I'm lying, then they are false. And if they are false because they fail to correspond with reality, then they must be true. Thus, the idea continues, no matter what we say about the truth or falsehood of these statements, we immediately contradict ourselves. So this is using these cunning sentences, the liar's paradox, "what I'm saying here is false," etc. It's using ridiculous linguistic knots and nonsensical sentences to invalidate the concept of truth corresponding to reality. But this is basically sophistry of the first order, I would suggest. It's ridiculous to get lost in the limitations of language. We must remember that existence comes first, reality. That's what we're trying to know, and the evolution of language has come along relatively recently, we could say. Reality comes first. Language is an invention of men, or it's something that's evolved or developed as a tool to organize our perceptual field, to categorize all of our knowledge of reality. And language is a limited thing. Just because some clever, cunning linguist can devise a silly, nonsensical sentence that will tie your brain in knots doesn't invalidate the concept of truth. It does mean, of course, that when we discuss ideas around truth, and in fact all of our use of language, it means that we need to choose our words carefully and precisely in order to be as clear and as possible in conveying our meaning. The next theory of truth we're going to look at is called the coherence theory. And this holds, in a nutshell, that an idea can be considered to be true if it fits in with all our other beliefs and ideas that we hold. It then therefore coheres with the rest of our beliefs. Now, this idea does have some merit on an intuitive level until we pick it apart. And this is kind of speaking to the idea of the law of non-contradiction. Contradictions don't exist in reality, of course. So in our mental map of reality, where we're trying to build up as accurate as possible a map of reality, any contradiction in there must indicate a problem, and we need to investigate further and find out where the contradiction is and resolve the contradiction. So the coherence theory of truth is kind of playing on this, and yet it's turned it upside down, because of course any given piece of information or an idea could cohere with other ideas, but they may all be false. So we can see that that's not really any kind of standard for truth. If you've got a bunch of wrong ideas and another wrong one comes along and fits in nicely with it, that isn't going to prove anything. But if you flip that idea on its head and you use the idea of any contradiction that you see as flagging an error, that is the proper way round. So this coherence theory of truth is really problematic. Clearly it can't work as a measure of truth. But if you invert it and just use the law of non-contradiction, that's really where you need to go. And that kind of gives the lie really to this whole theory. I mean, who would come up with the law of non-contradiction, the basic tool of rational thinking? somebody's turned that upside down. They've actually twisted that round on its head to come up with a theory of truth, which smells like disingenuousness to me. But there you go. The next theory of truth is the pragmatic theory, and this is similarly problematic. The pragmatic theory of truth, in essence, holds that an idea can be considered to be true if it works, if it's useful for making predictions about the world. Let me quote you a little bit here. As with coherence theory, truth in this sense is nothing to do with the way the world really is, but is just a function of whether an idea can be used as a model to make useful predictions about what's going to happen in the world. As a result, pragmatic truths can only be learned through interaction with the world. We don't discover truth by sitting alone in a room and thinking about it. There are a number of problems with the pragmatic theory of truth. To start with, obviously, if something's true, it works. So true ideas work. So the berries that are nutritious work at nourishing us, you know. If we were to have a discussion about the truthful way to build an electric generator to generate electricity, the theory that was true would be the one that works. The theory of spinning cotton yarn in a jar of marmalade wouldn't work, but the theory or the idea of rotating a coil of wire in a magnetic field would, because it's true. So we can see that truth is necessarily practical. It's practical to know how reality works. That's where we're going. But again, it's a back to front way of looking at this. You can't really be sure of what works until you know what is. So it's reality you have to look for, you have to look to first. It's be working backwards to look at what we allegedly think works, to try and find out about reality first, and that's how you determine what works. Also, of course, there's the point of debate about what works. Some people might say this works, some others might say something else works. What's one's interpretation of what works? And, you know, again, this horses and carts spring to mind, this metaphor of getting things the wrong way around. But the other point that sticks with this particular theory is that liars would think that untruth is pragmatic. So if you are trying to deceive someone, it would be very pragmatic to sell them an idea that doesn't work. So how does that all sit with the pragmatic theory? I suggest that, like the coherence theory, it's just a load of nonsense, and somebody has almost devised this theory for nefarious purposes, of which I can't even begin to imagine. But here's another theory of truth that seems like it's been created to order: the consensus theory of truth. Yep, even, you know, sadly and yet unsurprisingly, in the post-truth era, we have a consensus theory of truth. The idea that if enough people believe in something, it's going to somehow make it true. This would seem obvious nonsense to a young child at school, hopefully, an infant almost. But it's a theory, this is the interesting point, it's a theory that lends itself perfectly to supporting a political agenda. When we see the unanimous bunch of scientists and the consensus in the scientific community, allegedly, around climate issues and so forth, it's a theory of truth that really lends itself to political use. But there you go, it's clearly not true, because truth is not a function of numbers of people believing or rejecting any particular idea. That should be pretty obvious. So we're now going to delve into some of the more ridiculous theories of truth, and this discussion wouldn't be complete without mentioning what are called inflationary truths. Now don't worry, we're not going to spend much time on this because it's almost all nonsense. Inflationary theories of truth, they're sort of a broad category, a number of that fit into them, and they basically hold that truth is a property of propositions. And some even say that truth refers to a relational property that belongs to propositions. So this, in essence, these inflationary theories are again getting lost in semantics, in language, and where they can tie up little knots and contortionist things in language. They go, yeah, there you see, you can't find truth. It's just nonsense. And then, of course, there are deflationary theories of truth. How they come up with these names, I've no idea. Deflationary theories of truth. I found a quote here in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on deflationary theories. And it says here, one long-standing trend in the discussion of truth is to insist that truth really does not carry metaphysical significance at all. Do you get that? It doesn't carry any metaphysical significance. This, guys, is to divorce the concept of truth from reality completely. Deflationary theory of Frege and Ramsey is one you might want to look at if you want to waste some time. These are just absolutely nuts. There are more theories on truth, the axiomatic theories of truth, pluralistic theories on truth, an identity theory of truth, a revisionary theory of truth, etc., etc. Either, as I say, these fall into two different camps. Either they just get lost in language and they consider language the primary and not reality, or they're trying to divorce the concept of truth from the whole discussion of metaphysics entirely. So very disingenuous, I would suggest. So by way of wrapping this up now, let's just talk about facts, belief and knowledge. For clarity, a fact is necessarily true. It refers to a set of circumstances about the world rather than something, an idea that could be true. So a fact is already supposed to be true. Claiming something is a fact is claiming that it's true. Similarly, knowledge, if it is such, knowledge is the correct identification of some aspect of reality, and therefore knowledge is generally held to be true. Of course, people can be mistaken, and of course someone might claim that something is a fact or is knowledge, and in fact it may be wrong. But just to help you with your definitions really here. Most importantly though, a belief is not knowledge. A belief can be true, false or anything, just like information can be true or false. People often hold beliefs by invoking faith, which means they haven't got any reasons for believing it, but they just believe it anyway. So it's important to remember. Last word here is on censorship. In order to find truth, we must have access to information. We must have access to the raw data. We must be able to find out about that issue or that topic. And this is why censorship is invoked by governments and other institutions to prevent people from gathering the necessary information to discern truth. So if we bear in mind that truth and discerning of truth is a matter of life and death, you can conclude fairly easily that censorship is anti-life. It's therefore evil. So I hope this discussion has helped. Remember to check out the website, lawfulrebel.com. Stacks more then on finding truth. And please hit the like button if you got some value from this video. And do join me again for more videos at Lawful Rebel TV, and indeed catch up with me on the podcast at lawfulrebel.com.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be